And we're live, I think. Thank you for being patient there. I finally worked out there's actually a better way of doing it that doesn't involve me sitting here for like 20 seconds or so doing it. But hey ho. So today on Book Chat Live, we have the amazing author, Alison Morton. So before we start going through your book choices, can you describe yourself, like what kind of books you write and what sort of books do you like?
Well, I write thrillers of various sorts, and for the past 8 years, I've been writing alternate history thrillers, and they feature tough ladies, and they're set in a part of Europe that's still a little remnant of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And we've got two, I call them strands. So there's 4 books featuring one heroine, and then 4 books set a bit further back in the past featuring another. They're all, yes, they're thrillers, but they're really all about the people and how they react to the situation, what they've got to do. There is quite a lot of the Roman value system, and I bring all that in. I'm a historian, so of course I've been fascinated by Rome since I was 11. So of course, and I'm a bit of a feminist. So of course I bring all this together. What I like the last 2 ones, which I will be talking about, are more contemporary, but I'll tell you the story behind them because it's quite intriguing why I wrote those. What I like reading, when I was little, I read all the sort of historical children's books. In fact, we might talk about one in a minute. And I went on to things like The Saint. They were exciting thriller things, and John Creasy, and anything with a really good story and a mystery. But I particularly liked historical mysteries, and I loved historical fiction. So that's what I bent towards. And then I love any spy story. I think it's because there's some kind of mystery that's linked with bigger things. I don't know. I love context, and I love, so that's what was happening then. Oh, that's really, who was that? And then I used to go off as a kid and look them up in what used to be called the Encyclopedia Britannica, because I was so fascinated by people's actions and why they did it and what were the outcomes were. So I like something with a bit of interest, but a cracking story. So that's a brief rundown.
So, talking about a cracking story, and I guess this is the first one that you were talking about, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Now, this is a copy of mine I've had for years, literally years. It cost me 4 shillings. Now, that's really a really old money, and I don't think they use this cover anymore. This is the one that's on my bookshelf, and it was, I suppose, my first fantasy novel. And I was absolutely intrigued. And it's about 4 children, and they go to this imaginary country of Narnia, and there's a bad witch person and a good person who's personified by a lion, and there's talking creatures, and it's just fantastic. And I thought, as I read, I thought, this is all perfectly normal. And I started looking at my own wardrobe, but sadly.
No, Narnia. Yeah.
You've got things like, there are children behaving well, children behaving badly. They drive the whole story. And there's lots of moral stuff. But it was enough of an adventure to be exciting. And it was enough slightly fantasy to intrigue. So I've bought the whole series. When I was a kid, I used to go down to the bookshop with my pocket money. Or 1 or 2, I think I read in the library under the children's reading scheme, and then bought afterwards. So that was my first venture into fantasy. And I think that was great. I loved them. I still sometimes even read them now.
Well, it's got to be done, hasn't it?
And I think every child should read them.
Should we go on to the next book?
Yeah, the next one. This is an old favourite. This is what I went on to. You may be surprised for a thriller writer.
Have we got the right one?
Whoops, sorry. No.
You keep that book up, or
okay.
Let's pick one. Which one do you want?
Let's go for the Eagle of the Ninth, because that is really, really very important.
Yeah.
This is a story of a young Roman soldier called
Yeah.
Marcus, or called Marcus, of course.
Yeah.
And it's about the eagle in Roman terms was the legion symbol. It was incredibly important, it's battle standard, and losing it, huge disgrace. Anyway, the 9th Legion marched north in Britannia, as it was,
Yeah.
and were never heard of again. And Marcus is the
Yeah.
son commander. And so he sets off on an adventure to find what happened, see if there's any trace and all the rest of it. And it was an exciting story, and it was about Romans. So I was about 11, 9, 10, 11, that age when I first wrote it. Oh, read it, sorry.
I say
Read
might take umbrage of that.
And that was the time when I was we were going on holiday a lot and looking at Roman ruins, because my dad was a Roman nut. I became one, and that fitted perfectly. So that was that, my first Roman fiction.
So what about the Romans really appeals to you then? Why Romans are not Egyptians, for example?
Right, Romans are direct, complex, value-driven, and can be incredibly brutal and deceptive and intriguing and all the rest of it. But I shall sound like Monty Python's sketch now if I'm not careful. But they did give us systems and law and literature. They gave us roads and post offices and the idea of law courts and the idea of being a citizen rather than a subject. Although that, of course, all went haywire when the empire came in. I think yes, I am interested and I love them, if you see what I mean, but I'm perfectly aware of just how repressive they could be, but also how incredibly inventive. And some of the stuff they did, we never got back until the Victorian times, public sewers, the level of prosperity of the average person never came back until the 19th century. What's not to like?
Okay, shall we move on to the next book, which is The Old Shades by Georgette Heyer?
Yeah, now people think for thriller writers it's a weird choice.
Yeah.
But if you want to know how to write dialogue, this is the book. If you want characterization, this is the book. There is nobody like Georgette Heyer for getting her characters into your head. Yes, of course, there's a romance, but she's also a mystery writer, and some of her plots are downright intriguing. You just don't know where they're going to go.
Yeah.
That is a great book for writers to read, and everybody else. She's it, if you want to read Regency romance. This was my original book. I'm holding this piece of paper up.
Yeah.
Because when I bought it, it was 3 and 6, if you like. And this is the original one, but it fell apart because I'd reread it. So, anyway, I think These Old Shades, it's the archetypal Regency book, if you like.
Yeah.
So there you are. Definitely. And another, everybody must read this book.
Yeah. Well, let's go to a very different book, which is Fatherland.
Yeah.
By Robert Harris, which isn't it about if the Nazis won World War II, or am I getting confused with a different book?
No, it's one of the many, but this one came out 3 years after, it came out, in fact, around about the same time that the two Germanys, if you like, the East Germany ceased to be.
Yeah, the reunification.
In 1989, the wall came down. Robert Harris had this published in 1992. I'm not saying it's a coincidence, but it's perfect timing. And it caused a massive argument in Germany, as you can imagine. We start off with this guy, Xavier March, who's inspector in the criminal police. We're in 1964, about to celebrate Hitler's birthday.
Yeah.
But the lovely thing is his writing is fantastic. It's very, very succinct. His protagonist, this inspector in the Kripo, which is the Kriminalpolizei, he's looking for a murderer because, that's his job. But in the end, it turns, and he's trying to sort of investigate who it is and arrest the suspect. But in the end, he stumbles upon this huge secret. And in fact, he ends up as being pursued by the murderer, unofficially so. So it's, if you like, you've got a crime fiction, you've got political fiction, there's a personal relationship, and that's all set in the what if. But it's so naturally written and very succinct. So I loved it. And I thought, oh, you can turn history. And it was the first alternative history fiction that I ever became aware of.
Wow.
So that's where that came from.
I suspect it may be what influenced you to write the next book, which is Inceptio by Alison Morton.
And I happen to have a copy.
Hey, copy of your own book.
Well, that's Karen who becomes Karina on the front. And yeah, it did. But it was one of the triggers.
Yeah.
Another big trigger was I went to a bad film, and the photography was great. It was set in Rome, but it was so hacked up. I mean, we all like jump cuts in films because it puts the tension up and it's exciting. But it was a jolly good thing I'd read the book, because you couldn't follow what was going on. So I said to my husband, I could do better than this. So he said, well, why don't you?
Yeah.
And 90 days later, I had 90,000 words on. I know. It was rubbish. Total rubbish.
Yeah.
First books are always rubbish.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a clue what to do with it, but that's another story. Eventually, it came out about 3 years later, because I had to learn how to write novels.
Yeah.
But she starts off, she thinks she's an ordinary girl. She knows her mother's a foreigner.
Yeah.
And then this other government enforcer is chasing her, and she doesn't know why. And in the end, she has to flee to Romanova, which is her mother's homeland. And she's safe there with her grandmother's there. She gets a new lover. Life is fabulous. And then the bad guy turns up again, and she has to sort of be the worm that turned. So then she trains, goes undercover and so on, and goes into the persona she's going to be in the next 4 books.
Yeah. So this is in an alternative history similar to Fatherland.
Yeah, again, I like to put my characters in a perfectly natural, just to them, that's their normal life. It's an alternative version where this tiny little bit of Rome, of the Roman Empire, survived, because at the end of the Roman Empire, it didn't all fall like in the film. It split and diversified and sort of unraveled, and a lot of places became city-states which defended themselves against all the Goths and Ostrogoths and goodness knows what tribes that were trying to conquer what had been the Roman Empire. And this lot hold themselves up in the hills, if you like, and they've managed to survive. The twist is, of course, there is always a twist. It's ruled by women.
Yeah.
That gives me a chance to play a bit mischievously. Suppose the main character was a Jamie Bond, not a James Bond, that kind. And that women it's sort of like egalitarian light, where the natural way is the woman to head the family or whatever, but men aren't disadvantaged, but it's just a slight twist.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the fun things about writing fiction. You can do what you like with the world, and you can say, well, what happens if you do this? So shall we go on to your next book, Pick?
Yes, indeed.
Which is Naked in Death by J.D. Robb.
Just threw on the floor there.
Oh, so good you threw it on the floor. Yeah.
So that's that one. I think they've probably got new covers by now. I've got several in this In Death series. J.D. Robb is Nora Roberts.
Yeah.
So there is always going to be some kind of emotional relationship in there. But the main protagonist is Lieutenant, sorry, she's American, Lieutenant Eve Dallas of the New York Police, but it's set in 2057.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're slightly in the future where there's all sorts of gadgets and stuff and communications and all the rest of it. She's had a very difficult childhood. She was found in Dallas, and she has the name Eve because she was a little girl, and she had a very abusive childhood, which she's put behind her, but it does keep coming back in her dreams. So she's got this haunted thing. She's a very effective police lieutenant, a bit sparky. She's a bit socially inept, but she's extremely successful. And then she meets this mysterious millionaire who has had loads of lovely girlfriends and partners. And you can imagine, the inevitable happens, but it's not very straightforward. She also solves the murder, which she does in every book in the series. I like her because she's no nonsense and she drives the story.
Yeah. So back to the feminist kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, but to them it's perfectly natural. These are characters living naturally in their world. And in a way, I mean, all writers know you've got to drip in any explanations. It's the same for historic or anything that's slightly out of kilter of the ordinary world. But that's fun.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we go on to your next book, which is The Silver Pigs?
Oh, ancient copy of Silver Pigs.
Yeah.
Lindsay Davis is one of the best historical fiction writers around.
Yeah.
And she writes featuring a Roman detective set in the 1st century called Falco, who's a bit of a scamp. He's self-deprecating and cocky at the same time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And Lindsay Davis writes in this lovely, dry, witty, humorous tone, and it's really hilarious. And Falco's not always successful. He does do contracts for the imperial authority. He does investigations for individuals. Davis doesn't shy away from the brutal life of the 1st century, but you don't get dripping body parts.
Yeah.
And Falco has this girlfriend, Helena, who is really no nonsense, and a big friend who's Petro's the captain of the Rome Night Watch, the Vigiles. So you've got the official side, Falco, and his maverick side. He's got this girlfriend who keeps him in order. And it's just hilarious. And you go all over the Roman ancient world. Davis takes us to Palmyra, to Egypt, to Britannia, to Gaul, everywhere. And you learn. The research is good.
So,
great.
I go off on a tangent for a bit on occasion. Why did you choose with your books to write in an updated modern version of Rome as opposed to writing a book like this in the Roman Empire itself?
Because there's quite a lot of people like her and like Ruth Downey, who I'll go on about, and I'm trying to think of the other guy now, who do mysteries set in Rome. I wanted to have a female protagonist. I know Lindsay Davis has now done the Flavia Albia series, which is a female protagonist. I wanted a female protagonist, so I thought I'm going to have to bring her right up to the modern period.
Yeah.
Even by the 4th and 5th centuries, although women had a lot more autonomy in the Roman world, nothing like what they needed for my stories.
Yeah.
Besides, it's fun.
Yeah. Well, it makes it unique, doesn't it? Well, not unique, but more unique than I'm not sure how many other people have done updated Roman fiction.
Yeah, it doesn't fit in it fits into historical fiction because its alternative history can be seen as part of historical fiction if you're not at the bonkers end of the alternative history thing. If you're a bit further up, just by that slight what if end, because it could have happened, So
on that note, should we go on to another book by this amazing Alison Morton, Aurelia?
Aurelia. Now, whereas Inceptio was in the present, Aurelia takes us back to the late 60s, 70s and early 80s, which again is fun. No mobile phones, no internet, even in this alternative world.
Yeah.
You've just about got CCTV on tapes that you have to change every 6 hours, you know.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But in the first 3 books that I wrote, I thought Aurelia, as my protagonist's grandmother, was so interesting. I thought, I have to write a backstory when I finished Karina's modern day adventures. Okay, yeah, I think I've got to write this because we allude to what she did and we allude to the Great Rebellion and how Aurelia helped defeat it and all the rest of it. So what happened? Halfway through writing Aurelia, so there she is on the cover, I thought, I haven't got enough room to do it all. I'll have to write another book after this.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's quite nice because this enables me to give a lot more of the backstory of Romanova and some of the things that I wanted to explore. There was only one big war in the 20th century in this alternative world, the 1915 to 1925 war. There was no World War.
Yeah.
So Berlin, where some of the action takes place, still has quite a lot of the buildings and structure and housing that was there before in 1939 in the real world.
Yeah.
So that was fun. I had to go back and look at what was actually there.
Before it was bombed. Yeah.
But it's fascinating because you can use the same places, like Aurelia has to go and look for silver smugglers. And one of the places of investigation is Berlin. And they go to the Tempelhof. Well, of course, in our world, Tempelhof was abandoned after the airlift into Berlin.
Yeah.
Too small. And Aurelia even remarks on that. You know, you can bring in these other things that will have changed or not changed. And I think that's where the historians, I did a master's in history. It was quite useful because it gives you the analytical tools, you know, what happened, what didn't happen, what can you put in there, how does history work, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's the start of the second earlier one. And there's four in that little mini series within the Romanova. So somebody coming to it can choose the 4 current present day books or 4 books slightly in the past.
Okay. Well, I suspect there may be some other books from you later on, but shall we move on to the next one, which is The Hunt for Red October with
yes, fabulous.
Yes.
And of course there was the film with Sean Connery.
Yeah.
And he made I thought although he had Scottish accent, of course, but he played Ramius, and Ramius was supposed to come from one of the Baltic states. So it's quite logical when he speaks Russian that he has some kind of regional accent. Yeah. So that worked really well. And that was basically a cat and mouse chase around a submarine called the Red October. And nobody does techno thriller like Tom Clancy.
Yeah.
You have stories from multiple viewpoints, which you have to keep your brain there to throw them, but they all come together in the end. And this is one of the trademarks of Tom Clancy. He did Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and funnily enough, Executive Orders. He's got the same hero. Executive Orders has the hero Jack Ryan dealing with a global pandemic.
Yeah. Life and fiction and all the rest of it.
Yes. But I think Tom Clancy's very, very good for this deep technical thriller, and he's quite a joy to read.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to remember what happened in the film. I haven't read the book, but
the films go all over the place.
Yeah, but it's basically it's a Soviet submarine that's kind of
Soviet submarine the Americans want,
Yeah.
And the captain, his wife, had an accident in Soviet Russia, and his son, I think, is killed in Afghanistan. I can't remember, but he's by himself now, and he wants to defect, or does he? He wants to be
yeah.
And he's a very, very good submariner, and he keeps the Russian Navy and the American Navy on their toes. And in the end, he comes out a bit clearer, and the Americans send a CIA analyst who knows about Ramius they let him in onto the submarine from a helicopter, and he talks to Ramius, and that's all quite. But then somebody tries to kill them both, somebody on the submarine. So it's quite exciting.
Yeah, a lot happens. Yeah. Okay. Well, shall we move on to the next book, which is The Kill Artist by Daniel Silva.
Daniel Silva is somebody I came across completely by accident.
Those are the best books sometimes.
I was just looking for a book to read.
Yeah.
And I thought I put spy stories or something into Amazon, or I might have even been in a bookshop. You never know. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And it was about an art restorer. And he was a child of Holocaust survivors. And I thought, oh, this is quite good. And then he's drawn back into the spy world. He's been, his parents went to Israel after the war, and he's been brought up there, and he's done his military service and all that. But then his main thing was being an artist. Yeah. And so he's restoring paintings all over Europe and all the rest. And then he gets called back because I suppose all Israelis have this duty. If they get called back, they have to go and do it. And he was very good at this an early mission he did, so they've called him back.
Yeah.
And I think there are now 20 books in the series.
Oh.
And I think the writing is clear. There's an ensemble which is quite nice. You know, I like a team of different talents.
Yeah.
Quite clever. They're quite cleverly written. So I think I've read all of them. I'm just waiting for the next one to come out. But I heartily recommend it. And the art history and the art background is very, very good, which I like.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice when people put that attention to detail into their books, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. It's a lesson for us all.
Right. Shall we? I'm sure this next book coming up, Insurrectio, has a lesson for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, with all the titles, I've tried to keep it something that people might understand. It might be in Latin or Latinish.
It's a Latin word that's used in English as well, kind of.
Yes, insurrection or rebellion, whatever. So this is when Aurelia, that we met a minute ago, she has had a lifelong love, hate, rivalry, hate, love, whatever relationship with this bad guy called Caius Tellus. And in this book, it's not a spoiler or a giveaway. Caius, he's a very charismatic, popular person. He can charm the birds off the trees, literally.
Yeah.
And he's a populist. He has no scruples. I was writing this in 2017-18, and I was actually channeling the Third Reich, where this kind of populist person came to power and installed a brutal regime. And there was an election going on in a different country. And when it came out, quite a few of the reviewers drew comparisons. And I thought, I can't possibly comment on that.
Yeah.
But Caius leads this rebellion, and he's very cleverly done it. And Insurrectio is the story of how it happened. And Aurelia there's a weak ruler, and Aurelia tries to support her and keep things going, but in the end there's a power vacuum, and Caius and his brutal mob step into it and all the rest of it. And it's the story of how Aurelia tries to stop it. There's also one of her love stories she has, and it's about that fight against irrationality and fake news.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you what happens. Well, yeah, we're going to find out, I should suspect, in a minute.
Yeah. Well, I've got another book by you just coming up with a thing called Retalio.
Retalio, which again doesn't tell you, it tells you basically what's going to be happening.
Like retaliation, maybe?
Yeah, retaliation. But Aurelia does get away.
Yeah.
But she's forced into exile.
Oh, okay.
And Caius's people have made out that she was a collaborator with him. So her fellow exiles who have managed to get away after his regime, to escape, basically, like as you got in Nazi Germany, the exile community won't accept her because they think she's a collaborator. So she's completely alone. Well, she has her lover to support her, but she's desperate to try and get back to Romanova and get rid of him and liberate the country. And it's not the easiest thing you might think, even in fiction. You can't just leap up and say, right, let's all go and liberate our country. It doesn't quite work like that, especially when there's somebody insidious trying to kill you all the time.
Yeah.
One thing I do in all of mine is interlink them. So I wrote a novella called Nexus, which came after Aurelia, and Aurelia does a favour for a friend, which turns a bit grim, but that friend pops up again in Retalio to help her, and it's quite nice to sort of interlink things within a series. I particularly like that myself, and I read it.
Yeah, I like it because it shows somebody's planned ahead a bit as well. If you see a link between books, the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, don't we all like meeting characters we've met before?
Yeah, that's true. So, in terms of read order for your we've obviously got some newer books coming up later.
Yeah.
But for your Romanova books, and is there an order you'd recommend people read them in or buy them in?
Well, because I've got two quite separated strands, I would recommend you start with either Inceptio for the modern day ones, or Aurelia for the ones in the 60s to 80s. So, and then read Inceptio. Then there's Carina and Perfiditas and Successio, and that spans you over about 16 years in Carina's life.
Yeah.
The second one, Aurelia, where I've gone back to her grandmother as a younger woman, as a 28-year-old. You've got Aurelia, then Nexus, then Insurrectio and Retalio. So I would suggest, I've put them on Amazon as the first in the Carina series or the first in the Aurelia series, so people can see which strand they belong to. So I'd suggest Inceptio or Aurelia.
Okay. Right. Shall we go on to your next pick? Yeah. Which is The 12 Caesars by Suetonius.
Cool Roman stuff.
Yeah.
This was written by Suetonius. He was the secretary to Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian in the wall. Yeah. I think we all sort of got him. And Suetonius was Hadrian's secretary, so he was right at the top of Roman society. And he wrote back by the first 12 emperors. Although Julius Caesar wasn't an emperor, he was all but.
Yeah.
And you get the public lives, the public achievements, but also the private lives, warts and all. Not voyeuristically, but about you get it as it was, if you like.
Yeah.
But you also get a lot about Roman life and the ins and outs, and you can glean an enormous amount about people's motivations, how they reacted, why they did stuff, what was normal to them. You may not always like in our 21st century viewpoint, but that was how it was. And it's unique. It's one of the few quite dense sources. And if you get stuck and think, what was going on, or what was the motive, why did they do that, and you want some detail, it's a fantastic source. It's also very readable.
Yeah.
Very, very readable. Yes, of course, it's historical stuff, but anybody could read it.
Yeah.
So it's very, very nicely done.
Yeah. I think it's probably the oldest book we've had on this show so far. I'll have to look back. I don't think anybody's gone quite this far back, but yeah, it sounds interesting. I'm surprised they let him write it, really.
Yeah, I think read it, because there are so many films and stuff, and I mean, personally, I loved HBO's Rome, and that was great.
Yeah.
But so many films and so. This actually is the real thing, and I think if you really want to know, that's a jolly good place to start, because it's about people. We're back to people again. Yeah. You know, they're very removed from us, but they're still people.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on to the next book?
Yeah.
Is Memento Mori.
Yes. Oof. This is huge. There we are. That's at my ear level. It's a great big thing. This is by Ruth Downey, and although I do read a huge amount on my Kindle because it's so practical, I got this because Ruth and I were both speaking at a festival, and she and I swapped.
Oh, okay.
This is a signed copy from Ruth, and I gave her a signed copy. I can't remember of which one it was. So we swapped signed copies. Yeah. And Ruth, in a way similar to Lindsay Davis that we were talking about, her protagonist is a Roman who ends up being a detective by default. He's a doctor, and he starts off in the Roman army and later goes into private practice. And he's a bit grumpy. He's a very typical Roman man, you know, a manly man, but underneath he's got a really, really good heart. He tries to keep out of officialdom's way, but of course, inevitably he fails. But he ends up, when he's tending people's wounds and hurts and stuff, delving into mysteries. He always wants to try and put something right or help somebody. And in doing this, he comes across a slave girl in Britain who's very badly injured. In fact, who's going to be sold off as a sort of decrepit. And he heals her arm and all the rest of it, and then buys her as his own household slave. And then, of course, things develop over so many books. Ruth is a historian and archaeologist. So her research, you just don't have to worry. It's going to always be right.
Yeah, it can be right, yeah.
But these two characters are just completely fantastic. They're so multifaceted, and you hear about their worries, their fears, their triumphs. The Tilla, the Romans, the slave girl, she has hidden depths and terrible failing. You know, they are again people, and I thoroughly recommend all of them.
Yeah. Okay, shall we move on to the next book, which is Slow Horses?
Oh, yes.
Mick Herron.
Mick Herron is a sensation. Oh. He's actually a really nice bloke.
Yeah.
He writes spy stories, and Slow Horses is a way of describing Slough House, where they're based. And it's this group of has-beens, basically. They're intelligence service failures. Yeah. And they've been given, there's a nerd, there's a thwarted idealist, there's a psychopath, there's a ex-drunk, there's one who is almost too good to be true, who turns out to be a spy upon the spies. Yeah. And they're all collected together, and they're given the most mind-blowingly boring things to do in the hope they'll all resign.
Yeah.
They've none of them done anything sackable, but they're all total failures in one way or the other. And their leader is everything you possibly can think opposite to James Bond. He's a foul-mouthed slob. He smokes, he drinks, he's sarcastic in the extreme, but the whole thing is hysterically funny. Yet somehow this crowd of ineptitudes, they managed to succeed in some missions that they shouldn't really succeed in. And the official intelligence services, which is full of intrigue and scheming and politics, tries to keep closing them down. They just don't succeed. So you have conflict, you have beautiful writing, you have oddball characters, and there's a whole series.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not a skit on the intelligence story or the spy story, but it's incredibly amusing and beautifully written. So I thoroughly recommend that to anybody.
Yeah. And coming up are 2 books by this Alison Morton, of which are very different. Very different. Double Identity, and there's another one coming up in a second. So
yes,
these are not based in Rome or a Rome alternative history.
I'll
tell me the story.
There is a huge story behind this. I will need just to get one of the older books back. Now, remember, I was writing about Insurrectio.
Yeah.
Now, I always try and get somebody quite good to give me a quote, because there's nothing like social proof or another writer saying it's good. And I had Simon Scarrow blurbed Perfiditas, and in fact Ruth did Aurelia for Insurrectio con Iggulden.
Yeah.
Gave me, I mean, historical fiction writer, I mean, you can't really go wrong. If he says it's good, it's good. So that was really nice. And we had long chats about this. He's such a nice bloke. And he said, I don't quite sit as comfortably with the alternate history, although I love the Roman bit, Rome with guns. He says, what could be better? And he said, you write a fantastic riot and you can really get the tension going. He said, why don't you write Aurelia as like somebody working for a modern European agency, and she goes out and is an agent for that? And I said, well, I can't, because I've got to write 2 more books to complete Aurelia's story. And I said, well, that's a jolly good idea. And then I was challenged. Somebody said, why don't you write? I thought, well, why don't I just try and see if I can get a book put through the mainstream, just for a bit of a challenge,
Yeah.
And then I remember what Conan said, and I thought, oh, stuff it, I'm going to do that. So we have Double Identity, which is my answer. In fact, I sent him a copy. He says, oh, well done. He says, yeah, it's really good. So that was quite funny. And I've drawn on, I live in France, and I've drawn on that. And I see both sides of the equations, if you like. And I've made my heroine a dual national.
Yeah.
And I've kept the army. I spent 6 years in uniform. I suppose it's always going to be there.
Oh.
But I made her in the French army.
Yeah.
And she's just, in the French army, if you are at senior NCO level, you do a contract. So you do a 5-year contract, then your contract's renewed and off you go each 5 years. And she just finished her second one. She's about to get married. She's so happy. She's met the love of her life. It's fantastic. And he's working as a city trader in London for a year. She goes to London to have a weekend with him, and they're going to get married in a couple of months' time. And they're in this lovely little hotel in Mayfair, I suppose, Kensington, wherever, and they're having a lovely weekend. And she wakes up and she's having thoughts about what they're going to do in the next half hour. And he's dead in the bed beside her.
Mm.
And then in comes the police and blah, 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 blah. And this really stroppy copper. Yeah. Anyway, he wants to pin it on her and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she gets out of the, she's not a suspect anymore. So she goes back and thinks, what the hell do I do with my life now? So she re-enlists. where would she go?
Yeah.
And she can't just batten on her mum and dad. And then she re-enlists, and then she gets seconded to this new organisation, this European Investigation and Regulation Service. And guess who, when she arrives in Brussels to take up her job, is the stroppy copper from London, who's also been seconded, Jeff McCracken. So she has to work with him. And it turns out that Mel's fiancé, Melisande is her name, or Mel to her English friends, her fiancé was up to no good in financial trading and all sorts of dodgy do, et cetera, et cetera. So we go from there. And I enjoyed writing that because all the thriller stuff comes in, and insider stuff and the intelligence world. And you've also got the police world. I had to do quite a lot of research on that.
Yeah.
I ended up knowing the Police and Criminal Evidence Act quite well.
Yeah.
And Rachel, Bradley, she's ex-detective, and she gave me some pointers on procedure, which is quite good. Excuse me, may I?
No, feel free.
And that's really, really good, valuable stuff. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And Mel leads the investigation mostly, but of course you've got personal conflict, professional conflict. She's had this massive disappointment in her personal life. She's half French, half English, half military, half civilian. She doesn't know, hence the title, she doesn't know. Yeah. And she finds out through the investigation that everybody seems to have two selves. So that's quite interesting. I like a bit of psychology. And that was how Double Identity, it was all Con Iggulden's fault.
Yeah. So it was so good that you wrote another book called Double Pursuit, which I presume follows on from that.
It does. I just sort of felt I needed a follow-up. I thought her story's not finished. It's not. There's much more to come, and I think there's going to be at least another one.
Yeah.
And this time she has to face something from her past that she really, really, really doesn't want to face. And while she's hunting arms smugglers, somebody else is hunting her, hence double pursuit. So, and she's developed as a character. Jeff McCracken has developed as a character, but she's got this thing still inside her of sense of failure back in the past when she was almost killed, when she was on one of her army missions. And this, you see how she has to face it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there'll be another one.
Yeah. So do you feel you're going to go back to writing some more of the alternative history stuff, or do you think this is now your genre, so to speak?
Well, I always like thrillers, so that's everything's going to be. I'm afraid it's going to have to be a thriller. I like having an emotional relationship. I like comradeship. That's quite good. I like a bit of deception and intrigue. So those elements are always going to be there in any book I write, I think.
Yeah.
I read too many spy stories and crime fiction when I was young, So we're always going to have that. But my Romanova fans have asked me, I've done some short stories as well, little snippets from Romanova. I published that as a little collection of short stories, and I've written them for 3 anthologies, which, the fans have said, look, we really want a bit more about how Romanova started in the 4th century. So currently, I'm 52,000 words into the story about the founders of Romanova. Yeah. So I'm in the late 4th century, and it has got to be accurate.
Yeah, well, you're getting more and more historical fiction now. It's
so, and that does have to be written as a true historical fiction.
Yeah,
that's fun. Oh. It's wonderful, because by now in the 4th century, it's not the world of I Claudius. It's not the classical period.
Yeah.
It's not Julius
The
Caesar.
lesser known Roman bit, isn't it?
This is when it's all starting to fall apart a bit.
Yeah.
But it hasn't fallen apart. It's recognisably Roman, but it's not. It's sort of verging a little bit into the what they call now the early medieval. Yes, you'll see Roman soldiers in armour, but it's more likely to be chainmail, and they do actually wear breeches quite a lot.
Oh.
You know, you're melding into the sort of more traditional, say early medieval that you see, and more Byzantine type of dress. Although it's not Byzantium, if you see what I mean. Yeah. We always think, oh, that's Roman, but Rome went on for 1,200 years.
Yeah.
And stuff changes.
Yeah, it's a bit like Egypt and its multiple kingdoms, but Rome was around for a long time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you project it back and you're in the 8th century from here.
Yeah.
I know things go faster now, but so by 370 AD, things have changed, and you've got all the religious conflict. The whole place is becoming much more Christianized, and for pagans or people who believed in the old gods, it's becoming very, very awkward socially, professionally. You can't advance in anything if you're not a Christian. You are sometimes socially ostracized. Everything becomes a great deal more difficult. And so that's a lovely bit of conflict for writers.
Right. So I may screw this up, but we come on to your final item.
Yeah.
Actually, I asked you.
Yay!
There we go. I've got to get that whole thing working better. But I asked you, if money was no object on the Amazon store, what would you pick? And you picked this amazing Lego Colosseum set. So why did you pick this? I mean, it's a stupid question, really. But
well, no. I mean, I've seen quite a lot of amphitheatres, theatres, Colosseum. I've seen all over the Roman Empire. I'm one of those very sad people whose holidays were focused on looking at Roman rubble, as my husband calls it. I've seen a lot of them, and although when I went to Rome and I saw the actual original, well, it's the Flavian Amphitheatre, if we're being proper, because it was begun by Vespasian, finished by Titus, his son. Although there was loads and loads and loads of people, it was March, but there was still loads of people. It's really incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
Just fantastic. And then when Lego I did Lego with my son when he was small, and it was lovely. You play with it, you construct, you do this, you do. When I saw it, I thought, I have to have it. It's going to be about a couple of hundred maybe, but I'll have to have this. It's enormous. And then I saw it was so much. I thought, I can't do that. I just can't afford it. And every time I see it, I just have this feeling of envy.
Yeah.
And when you said pick something, I thought, oh, yes, that's it. It's not necessary. It's a luxury. It will be fantastic to build it. So if you can afford it and you have no other calls on your money, I would definitely get it. But
and is there anybody watching who wants to buy Alison this item? Then feel free to go ahead via my affiliate.
Oh, yes. I mean, the Colosseum you see now, it's stripped of all its lovely marble, because they nicked it all to buy churches. There's quite a lot of the Colosseum cladding in the churches in current day Rome.
Yeah.
But even with bits off it and the cladding gone and the stands not there and the no floor and none of the mechanical fantastic stuff there, it's still impressive.
Yeah, it's quite well, I mean, Rome in general is, I mean, what I find, let me remove this and we'll go back to more normal. But what I find interesting about Rome and London to some extent, but Rome especially, is that in other cities, they'd have a gift shop next to everything in Rome. Like you can walk 10 foot and there'll be some like tower that would be like a tourist attraction in any other city, and people are just walking past it because there's like, oh, there's the Forum there, there's the Colosseum there, there's the church, so there's just so much history in Rome that's just amazing.
It's also, I mean, I live in France, and you trip over Rome everywhere because Gaul was very, very Romanized, and you go somewhere like Nîmes, and the most important things around the Colosseum there are the restaurants, of course. I mean, the French have got it sorted out, really. You can buy postcards, but it's the restaurants. And there's a amphitheatre, there's a arena near us at a place called Gênes, which was the biggest one in Western France. And, it's just not touristified at all. And you can enjoy the atmosphere. You can see the entrances. You can see where people used to sit. Whereas the more crowded ones, you perhaps can't. So, we trip over Rome every day here.
Yeah. So let me ask you some filler questions to fill up the hour. But
I'd rather gallop through, but
I know. Well, that's probably me not asking you enough about all the things. But
no.
I'm not going to ask you the boring standard question. If you had to write a different alternative history that was nothing to do with Rome, what would that alternative history be? What would that world be?
Difficult one. I think I've been so fascinated by Rome. I tell you something I did do. Although she was a Romanova, I was asked to contribute to 1066, which you can get on. And it was 1066 turned upside down. And it was what if of the William hadn't won and conquered England. And I had my character, she came and she tried to negotiate between the Normans and the Saxons, and trying to research on Normandy as it would have been with a Romanova there in the background, if you like. Slightly alternative Normandy was quite interesting. That was quite interesting. I mean, other periods, there have been people, there's a load of them about the war, the Second World War. The Americans love the Civil War. They like turning that round, and say the Second World War. There was a series I'm desperately trying to say. Lauren Anderson wrote about the Tudors. That's more a YA series, I would say. There's Shannon Salin's written about Napoleon. That was quite good, an alternative version. There are, of course, the Michael Chabon ones, the Jewish Policemen's Union, where instead of the Near East, the Jewish community was settled in Alaska under a lease scheme, and then there's a mystery. So there are quite a lot of ideas, and sometimes I've even written a blog post called "Alternative History Isn't Just About the Nazis."
Well, I did write a time travel novel with alternative Nazi history, so I can't really criticize anybody.
Well, alternative history it's when the timeline diverges, it doesn't go back. You can't go back. Eric Flint wrote the ones, but that was had an element of time travel, which isn't really alternative history. You've got to go off, and that's it. You can't go back.
So what makes good alternative history then for you? So if you're over and above, like, just say it's an average style of writing, so not like, because obviously somebody's a brilliant writer or particular, but just in terms of pure alternative history, what makes a good alternative history for you?
Right. I think it's got to be thought through. You've got to have worked out, I mean, it's not alternative history, but I know J.K. Rowling wrote notebooks and notebooks and notebooks about her new world. I think the world building is the essential item. I mean, The Man in the High Castle the film series was well thought out in world terms, and you have to think about systems, food, names, buildings, jobs, farming.
Yeah.
You've got to, and who's in charge, of course, is always very important, but you've got to do the whole world. And if that world doesn't hang together, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I've read a few of them, the world's very good. It's a bit, I've read one where it was a bit telly. It was a bit, we were told all the things instead of shown it. That was a bit irritating, but it was a very plausible alternative world. But the story was rubbish.
Yeah.
And you've got to have both elements together.
Yeah.
You've got to have a story that would work outside in a way. Yet, I'm just about to contradict myself, a story that relies on the alternativeness of the world.
Yeah.
I couldn't have any of my Romanova characters being too much into collecting China kittens.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work with the Roman mindset. They're much more direct. So you've got to, I mean, one of the things when I do workshops on character and stuff, and character in setting is one of the ones, and I say, close your eyes and walk your character down the street. What do they see and who do they talk to?
Yeah.
What's the transport? What have they, say you're going through a market, what are they selling? If you're going through a sophisticated shopping mall, what kind of shops are? Close your eyes and work that one out, and then you'll get an idea of what you've got to do.
Yeah.
So for me, it's got to have all that stuff.
Yeah. So what is the book that you're most proud of writing? Yeah. If you had to pick one child, which child would you pick? Yeah.
Ooh. I'm going to wiggle out of that one. I mean, Inceptio was the first one up, and that was that was the most researched, edited, consulted. That was the one I honed like anything. So that was my first baby.
Yeah.
I didn't get into, you might also have had this, I didn't get into feeling comfortable with my reading. I didn't feel it flowed until I got to Successio, which is the fourth of Karina's adventures in the modern world.
Yeah.
When I started writing Aurelia, which takes us back to the 60s, I found it really easy in a way to draft, apart from all the history and the maps of Berlin and all the rest of it. The story flowed. I don't know which one I'm most proud of. I mean, Insurrectio and Retalio, I see, although they're standalones, I see them as twins. I don't know, Insurrectio's a direct descendant of my master's thesis on the Third Reich.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did 3 years of doing my master's, so I did the research. I don't know. And double identity, that's sort of, I don't know, I think my first love is still Romanova.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've heard the last of it. I can't sort of leave it alone.
Yeah.
But I am rather warming to Mel.
Yeah.
So sorry, prevaricate.
No, that's all right. I mean, a non-answer is an answer. So I'm sounding like a philosopher there. So other question. I managed to ask Dan Holloway the same question twice, but I'll try and avoid doing that. But what is the book that you would most like to write? Like, what if there was like I mean, it's easier in a way to ask this to somebody who's a non-fiction author in a way, but is there a book idea that you think this would be the pinnacle of my sort of career? There's an idea, but you're not quite yet ready to write it, sort of thing. The magnus opus, so to speak.
I don't know. I mean, I really, really, over several decades, really wanted to get the Romanova story out.
Yeah. So you probably would have done it.
Yeah, I mean, I was never a writer. I was various things, but my last few years were as a translator and running a translation company. So, and I've done copywriting, documentation. I've done anything you can think of to do with words. So I've always wanted to output words. And I hadn't realized I wanted to write. No, I think I'm very happy having written what I've written, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
There's nothing that burns at the moment. I just would like to revisit Romanova. I'd like to do the third one here. I think being able to construct something that is reasonable, well, it is publishable. People seem to buy it, all my books.
Yeah.
People have bought them and enjoyed them. So I have to assume that they've liked them.
Yeah.
So that's sharing my thoughts, my ideas, my wacky world, if you like. It's not a wacky world. It's a very logical world. It's a much nicer world than the real one sometimes.
Yeah.
Being able to share that has been a huge privilege. And I know this is going to sound really sucky, but if Amazon hadn't allowed us to do this, it would have been a much poorer world. I mean, I am delighted that I can publish. Obviously, I'm being a perfectionist. I've made sure that they're of good quality and everything's done properly. The editing, the cover, they're getting your facts right. They're getting a good story, and I've had lots of help along the way. But I've been really grateful. I've very much appreciated the opportunity to do that. At the moment, this is where I want to be honest. Writing books, enjoying them, getting them out for people to read.
Right. Okay. Well, I think you've done the time. You've done the time. And it was great to have you on the show. And if you're quiet about it, can you tell people maybe, like, without being too taking people off Amazon, but how can people find out more about you and your book?
It's my Amazon author page.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is a nice, obvious place, which has got other information on. I've had my blogs for, not quite 10 years. So my blog is Alison-Morton.com.
Yeah.
So it's Alison-, but if you did put it all in one, it'll still get there. Yeah. So, I mean, the Amazon author page has all the books, a little bit about me. I think in the US, it also puts your latest blog post up.
Yeah, I think it does. Nice.
Yeah. I mean, I've got, 10 years of blog articles on there, all about Romanova and the books and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So that's quite nice. And I tweet and I do Facebook. So, the usual stuff. Yeah. But I think the Amazon author page is probably a good place to start.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for being on the show. And I'm now going to humiliate myself and probably go finish on the wrong stream.
Before you go, thank you very much for having me on. I mean, I could talk forever about books. I mean, it was a real task trying to narrow it down.
I know. It's funny because some of the people who've been potential guests on this show have been like, oh, it's hard to get that many books together. And it's like,
no.
But most of the people who come on have been like, it's like whittling it down to 18 books.
I mean, I'd do that.
I think I would. I mean, I listen mainly to audio books, but I would struggle to get down to 18 books in a way. I mean, once I mean, this is the thing. There are some people who read hundreds of books, and then there are some people who read one book a year. And you might have struggled to get.
I think writers read a lot of books because that's part of your continuous professional development, as they say.
Should be, yeah.
I put a blog post up the other day saying books I've read and enjoyed. I don't put the ones up I didn't, because that's not fair. I'm just not the reader for them. And I think it was about 120.
Yeah.
But I mean, reading is a huge pleasure. And reading, I mean, some say reading classically. You read any old thing, but reading across the genres, coming into new ideas, having, just sheer fun, just pleasure. And it's also good for us as writers because we see different ways of doing things, different developments. We get insights into stuff. So, what's not to like?
Yeah. And also, people have now discovered that there is a Lego Colosseum set as well.
I know.
We've helped society as a whole. So, anybody wants to go and buy that set and send it to Alison, please feel free to.
Yes.
So, thanks for the people who've been watching. There have been quite a few. Like I was up to about 8 people at one point watching it. Nobody's commented at all. So, either like totally entranced or they just.
It's been great chatting to you, Tim.
Yeah. All right. So, thanks a lot for being the guest.
See you. Bye.
And end it here.